What's up, guys? 3-3 yesterday. Not great. Wound up being a very slight win for me somehow with the way the money lines worked out. Could have easily been a winning day if a couple of things had gone a little bit differently. Of course, Villanova was the worst out of all the games yesterday, the hardest one to take. They were getting blown out of the building. So at that point, it's just losing a blowout and just get it over with, because that's a game you just write that off as a loss. You don't want to come back to it and see the Villanovas erase an entire 25-point deficit in the second half. All of a sudden it's tied, and then you have all this hope, like, holy crap, they're actually going to do this. And then Creighton still has the final possession, and they win the game on a buzzer beater, essentially a buzzer beater, 0.2 seconds left. It's like, don't even do that, man. Don't make it seem like you have any chance of winning if you're not going to win. Just lose horribly and get it over with, even though it makes me look like more of an idiot. Doesn't matter money-wise. Just because Villanova comes back, hey, it looks like a better play, and then you can complain about it and say that it should have won. I'd rather just not be teased that way and just take the obvious loss. So that was pretty bad. And then I think probably the Detroit Pistons and Providence probably were closer than the final score actually indicated, statistically at least. I don't know. Detroit was still in that game at halftime, and then things completely unraveled after that. Providence, they started out with a 15-2 lead out of the gate, and it looked like, yeah, they came to play. They're probably going to be able to hang in this game, probably, especially because it's probably going to be a lower scoring game. That wound up not happening. They were just horrible in the second half, and even though statistically it wasn't as bad as the score looked, but they were down over 20, I think, with 5 minutes to go or something, and they wound up almost still getting back within that number at the end. It was just too much to overcome there, but it's, not great. I just look like a genius from the Tampa Bay Lightning winning by 7 goals or whatever. That was good, and then a few of the basketball games got there, but the Mississippi State one, I mean, they kind of were a tease as well. I think that, I didn't see it, but I think that game was close pretty much the whole way, so maybe they shouldn't have covered. I don't know, but they wound up losing the game outright as a favorite, and it looked like they had some chances to maybe turn it around and actually do it near the end, especially it went into overtime. You extend the game there and get 5 more minutes. It's like, all right, have a good overtime period, maybe get fouled a couple times, maybe cover this number, even though obviously it's not a good situation when you need a favorite to cover and it goes into overtime, but it seemed like it might be possible, but no, they still wound up losing outright, so those unranked home favorites not doing as well, although Texas Tech won. So those games went 1-1 yesterday. And my extra leans that I gave out on the bigger games went 2-1. So should I bet them? I don't know. I just kind of like the fact that Duke lost, even though I expected them to win that game. And I think they're the slightly better team over North Carolina. I'm just not a fan, and it's just fun to see that happening. And yeah, North Carolina's team, their players are kind of like taunting the Duke student section at the end. Duke student section started throwing all this water and liquid at them, which, I don't know. You can't do that, man. It's reminiscent of like New York Yankees versus the Red Sox in that 2004 ALCS where they had to bring the SWAT team out because they were throwing like glass beer bottles out onto the field. You just can't do that, man. Just don't let it get that far. The Duke fans, I think, might have ruined some laptops down there at the booth that was down, the electronics booth that was down there, maybe wrecking some electronics. You can't do that, man. Have better aim. And then during the game, there was also a play where Filipowski, the guy who, he's complaining about Wake Forest fans rushing the court, their students rushing the court. You got to protect the players, man. Filipowski's out there just still being a dirty player. Even though I think he intentionally tripped that fan during the Wake Forest thing, but in yesterday's game, he was on the ground. He very clearly intentionally tripped one of the North Carolina players, or tried to. While he was getting up, he just completely throws his leg out. Nobody gets up that way. Just such dirty shit, man. Oh, man. I mean, players on a lot of these teams are dirty, but Filipowski is like noticeably so. All right, moving on to today. I got 3 plays today. I'm skipping the NHL card. It's a smaller NHL card. Again, it's just, I feel like I'm being maybe too selective in the NHL recently, but there's just nothing that I really like on that card today. 5 games or whatever. I really, really don't like it. College basketball is going to get interesting. We got a lot of conference tournament games going. The Colonial Conference Tournament is picking up steam, as I think they had a couple of their opening round games with some of their worst teams playing yesterday. Now their best teams are getting in the mix here with Charleston, the number 1 seed, playing in the first game up today against Monmouth. Nothing of interest betting wise there. You got that. You got the Southland conferences kicking off with some of their worst teams playing to start. And a couple of the other conferences are getting right to the end here. We have 3 conference finals today, I believe. UNC Asheville, the first one up at noon my time against Longwood. Asheville is up to a 3.5-point favorite. I would kind of want to lean Asheville in a way just because Longwood pulled off like a pretty big upset, unfortunately, of the 1 seed in the Big South Conference yesterday on their home floor too, High Point, because in this conference, the number 1 seed, I believe, just hosts the conference tournament. So the whole thing is at High Point, and High Point lost on their home floor in overtime to Longwood and blew like a 15-point lead. Like I looked at the score of that game and I was like, oh, High Point, yeah, they're running away with this one. And then all of a sudden they wind up going into overtime and not even winning the game. That's just insane. So my first reaction, the way that I like to bet would be that, I got to go against Longwood here because that's just such a crazy upset. Although you don't really have letdowns in a tournament. Like they're obviously going to want to show up because this is for all the marbles, man. You get into the NCAA tournament if you win this game. You win the Big South, so you become the Big South champion if you win this. So it's not like they're going to overlook their opponent, Longwood. There's no such thing as a letdown spot here, but it's still like that team might be a little bit overvalued and they might be gassed. The problem is that UNC Asheville played the later game after that, and they also went into overtime. So I tend to like it a lot less just because there's less time off, and Asheville had to play a similarly tough game like right after it. Although in Asheville's case, they almost got upset, whereas Longwood pulled off the upset, although both upsets are kind of mild number-wise. Longwood, I think, was only a 4.5-point underdog or something, and I'd have to go look at that, though, because it was at High Point, so maybe it was a little bit bigger than that. And then Asheville was like a 2.5-point favorite over Gardner-Webb, so not by much, but Asheville kind of had an escape there. So that would kind of put me on the Asheville side. It does look like the line is moving in that direction, but I'm not going to get involved in it. And, of course, Asheville, they got to still have a target on their back because they're one of the better teams in this conference. They win this conference more often than most teams, and they won it last year. So I believe Longwood has only won it once in their entire history. I think they've only made the NCAA tournament once in their history, although that was 2 years ago. I believe that was 2 years ago. So I think these 2 teams are the last 2 teams that won this conference, and they're playing against each other now. Disappointed, man, because High Point is the best team in this conference, and they're just not going to wind up getting into the tournament. And of course, they have not. I don't know if they've ever been to the tournament, but of course, that would be like a newcomer to the tournament. So that would be more fun to see High Point get there. They're a way better offensive team, but their defense is just terrible. So I don't know. I mean, of course, their defense is terrible. They had a big lead yesterday and completely blew it. So Big South, that'll be the first team to clinch an auto bid to the tournament tonight. And it'll be one of their most recent 2 champions, unfortunately, is going to win that game regardless of the outcome. Drake, Indiana State, and Austin P and Stetson are both playing. Those are championship games. Drake, Indiana State, I have a feeling that one's going to be a good game, man. I'm rooting for Indiana State just because I just really want to see that team in the tournament and do something. I like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, man. Avila, he's crazy, man. He's kind of he's almost like Jokic light or something. Like, I don't know how you can have like a big white guy like that. Or I guess he's not white if his name is Avila. I guess he's Hispanic, but I don't know. Like he looks pretty white. But you have a big white guy like that who like can't really run, but he somehow makes these like ridiculous no-look passes like across the court and stuff. It's like, how does he make passes like that? And on top of that, he can score. That guy's fun to watch. I kind of want to see Indiana State do it. Drake, of course, won this conference last year, and they still have DeVries on their team. He's their best player, so that's going to be interesting. I believe is he the coach's son? I think he might be the coach's son, but he was on the team last year as well when they made the tournament. They won this conference last year, so I would like to see Indiana State some fresh blood, not because I'm a Celtics fan and Larry Bird went to Indiana State. And Indiana State basically has been completely irrelevant since then, even though they've made the tournament maybe a couple times since then and bowed out in the first round badly. But Larry Bird, I mean, he is a guy that told me to fuck off when I was 11 and tried to get his autograph along with a bunch of his teammates from the Celtics on a Celtics hat, so that's great. That was when he was the coach of the Indiana Pacers at a Celtics Summer League game, and he was there, so that was great. Larry Bird, I don't know, maybe kind of a dick in person, I don't know, but Indiana State, I would like to, going on all these tangents, I would like to see Indiana State win this, but I'm not going to have a bet on this game, but this line's sitting only at 2.5 as a favorite for Indiana State. Indiana State just absolutely annihilated Northern Iowa yesterday, and they played in the earlier game yesterday, but I would tend to not want to be on Indiana State because of that, just because they looked so good in that game yesterday, even though Northern Iowa, not that good. They had come on strong towards the end of the season and wound up in the 4 seed, but Drake had a much tougher game yesterday against a way better team than Northern Iowa, though. Bradley, who was the other top team in this conference. That was a tough game. I thought it was going to be a good game, and it was. Bradley had a big early lead, and Drake was able to take it back and win that game in a pretty close game. Both games I said were going to be good were good, man. And the Western Carolina Furman one, I think did that go into overtime? It might have. I was watching that game. I think it went into overtime. It was a close game at the end there. So both of those games that I said would be good were. But anyway, yeah, Drake, Indiana State. Indiana State only the slight favorite there. Drake played the later of the two games and the tougher of the two games yesterday. But Indiana State looked so good in that blowout that I don't know. I think at least Indiana State will be the better rested team because of the way this whole thing's set up coming into this game. But still, did they look too good because of that blowout? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to play on that either. And then Stetson Austin P, the championship in the ASUN. I would kind of like to see Stetson get there, man. I think they've never been to the tournament before. They're a 4.5-point favorite in this one. It would be fun to see them get into the tournament. And it looks like that line has moved up. It looks like kind of all of these favorites actually seem to have the cash discrepancy on them right now, even though they're also all public in UNC Asheville, Stetson, and Indiana State. So I kind of don't want to, I really just don't want to get involved in any of those, but I would kind of like to see the favorites win those, but we will see. When it comes down to these conference tournaments, I like to see the better teams, the teams that work so hard during the season and prove that they were the better teams. I don't like to see them get knocked out like High Point did by 1 point, by a couple plays going one way or the other at the end, and you're like, one of your best seasons of program history is just totally gone now. You don't even make the tournament. I hate that. Conference tournaments, I mean, there's a lot of excitement during them, but the fact that they eliminate some of the teams that really deserve to get into the tournament, that sucks. And Indiana State and Drake, that would be more so. I mean, kind of both of these teams have arguments to make the tournament, but Indiana State not making it would kind of suck, although at least Drake, I mean, they're also a pretty good team. They're not that much worse than Indiana State. So, but yeah, Stetson Austin P. I would tend to think Stetson's going to be able to get it done. I think they're hosting it, so I think this is on their home floor. They're the better team here. I would just kind of expect them to get it done, but I don't know. I mean, they had a scare in their last game against Jacksonville. I think Austin P had a close game too. These games in the ASUN tournament have all been pretty close. But Austin P, of course, beat North Alabama. So Austin P didn't even have to run through any of the better teams in the conference on their way here. They just had to face North Alabama, who had already taken out Lipscomb for them. So they had an easier game, and they've had a few days off now. So Stetson didn't have to face Eastern Kentucky either, though, so I don't know. So both of the better teams in the conference got knocked out early, but it would be nice to see Stetson get in for the first time ever. It would be cool if that happens, even though they'll wind up as a 16 seed and maybe even in a play-in the 16 seed. So that's what those teams are playing for. The MVC, you'll probably see that team get into like an 11 or 12 seed, whichever team wins that. The Big South, probably like UNC Asheville, is probably around a 15 or a 16 seed. And then Stetson, Austin P, that team is almost definitively going to be a 16 seed and maybe a play-in 16. And then some of the other games picking up. Towson, actually not that much of in the Colonial there, not that much of an underdog against UNC Wilmington. Only 3.5-point favorites for UNC Wilmington, who at points has looked like the best team in this conference. And they're one of probably UNC Wilmington and Charleston are the top two teams in that conference. So it'll be interesting. Towson, not that bad a team, though. And they played a pretty decent game in their prior game to advance to this game, knocking out William and Mary, who isn't really good at all. But Towson lost at UNC Wilmington in their final regular season game before that. So I don't know if there's going to be any sort of complacency on the UNC Wilmington part there. The Patriot is into their semifinals with Colgate, pretty big favorite, 9.5 or something over Bucknell. I would kind of expect them to be able to get out of there with the win there. If Colgate doesn't win that conference, you're gonna see a real bad team getting into the tournament. There is very likely a 16 seed, I would say, in Lehigh and BU. I'm rooting for BU just because of my homerism, and because my parents, it's their alma mater. But even so, like, I just don't know if they're going to be able to get it done against a Lehigh team that, as far as the Patriots is concerned, isn't that bad. But BU is one of the hotter teams in that conference. And then in the SoCon, we're down to the semifinals, I think, where East Tennessee State knocked out UNC Greensboro yesterday. So one of the best teams in the conference is out, with Greensboro being out now. That's crazy. So East Tennessee is getting Chattanooga in the later of these two games. I would almost want to lean to Chattanooga just because East Tennessee pulled off that big upset. But like I said, in a tournament like this, that's not really a reason to do that. There aren't really letdowns. It's just a matter of, is that team going to be gassed? And I'm going to talk about one team in a minute that isn't really a letdown spot. But if you're going to go with the letdown spot, you kind of want the team that you're playing on to have had like a scare in the last game. That's what I like more. So I am going to be on one of those games, which I'll talk about in a second. Chattanooga's down from 7.5 point favorite to 6.5 point favorite. So kind of interesting there. I would expect them to win that game because they're the better team and one of the top 3 teams in this conference, but I'm not entirely sure that they actually will. I don't know. You never know what's going to happen in some of these crazy games, but I would kind of expect them, out of the teams that are left here, it almost seems like Chattanooga has the best shot to win this conference now, just because they have the easier matchup in this game here. Where Samford, even though they're playing a Furman team that came into this, I think they came into the tournament, at 500 at 15-15, and now they've won 2 games in the tournament. Furman, they had a lot of injuries during the season, man, and now they're healthy, and they're the team that won this conference last year, but a couple of the best players on the team are gone from last year's team. But even so, they're still one of the better teams. They're probably a top 4 team in this conference. I mentioned them yesterday, and they were able to beat Western Carolina in a really crazy close game there. Western Carolina is one of the best players in this conference. They're all about, what is his name? Vontarius Woolbright or whatever. He had another triple-double yesterday. That guy's a crazy player, man. I don't know if he's going to be good enough to make the NBA or not, but he's fun to watch in college. He is a crazy player. He is a dominant force on the court. It's just Western Carolina. I don't know if they have that much around him. And they did not get past Furman. Furman's only a 2.5 point underdog against Samford, who has a really, really great looking record and had a great season and probably deserved to be the winner of this conference tournament. But I'm not so sure that they will be, man. Furman is one of the only teams in the conference that beat them this year. They only lost 3 times in conference, and one of them was on the road at Furman. So Furman is definitely competitive, and I expect that game to be competitive. So I'm not convinced that Samford, whatever S school this is, I'm not convinced that Samford is going to actually be able to get out of this. Samford, they're in a better rest spot, at least. They played an earlier game yesterday and easily beat Mercer, who was one of the other teams who beat them this year. So they're having to run through the teams that beat them this year, which is ridiculous. I don't know. Is it possible they have to face all 3? Who was the other team that beat them this year? Furman, Mercer, and Wofford. No, so Wofford's out. So Wofford actually, I think, blew them out too. But, I mean, you trip up in the regular season. But still, I think Furman, this is going to be the toughest matchup for Samford in this tournament here. I'm rambling here and not even getting to my bets yet, although I only have 2. But I find all this stuff fun to watch and pretty interesting. So that game's interesting. And then what else we got here? But I forget what else I was going to say about Samford. But yeah, they're having to face 2 of the 3 teams that beat them during the regular season. They got some revenge against Mercer. They got revenge against Mercer. They already got their revenge against Furman. They beat them at home, but only beat them by 2. So they have not been able to beat them really at all this year. They only beat them by 2 at home, and they lost, I think, by several points on the road to Furman. So Furman, probably the toughest matchup for them in this entire conference. So it's going to get a little dicey for Samford, which I don't love that, because I do kind of want to see Samford get through here just because they had such a really good season. And I still think they are the best team in this conference. And this is all neutral site. I think these are all at Asheville, North Carolina. So the UNC Asheville, their arena might be hosting the SoCon conference tournament, whereas UNC Asheville, of course, in the Big South, and that game is being played on the neutral site at High Point. I don't know what would happen if UNC Asheville had to host a game. Like, do they have multiple like arenas there? I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's not at UNC Asheville, but I know the SoCon is somewhere in Asheville, North Carolina. And then, we do have some regular season games to talk about as well. And then the Sun Belt is going on tour. Texas State is making a weird Cinderella run as an 11 seed in that conference. So, tend to think that a Cinderella run is going to finally end when they're a double-digit underdog finally against James Madison. James Madison, definitely the better team. Texas State pulled off a ridiculous upset. Not ridiculous, only 5.5. Troy, I think, has been a little bit overrated. They've been one of the higher seeds in this conference, but kind of playing over their heads a little bit, and their record looks better than they actually are. So maybe that's not as crazy of an upset as it looks. One of the games I'm going to be on, and I should just mention the Big Sky and the Summit tournaments are both going on too. I don't really care about what's going on in those right now, although probably watch some of those games just to see who advances. But the other game, one of the games I'm going to be on is in the Sun Belt, actually, and I'm going to lay the points with Appalachian State. So let's get to it, man. App State, they're up from 4.5 to 5. They are public with 86% of the tickets, but 90% of the cash. It looks like the line is moving up on them. They're just the better team, man. And I like how the spot sets up for them here. So Appalachian State, they're the way better defensive team, and they're the slower tempo team. They're 29th in defensive efficiency and 200th in tempo. So they play a little bit of a slower style game, and they play a very good defense. They do lapse in scoring at times. So Arkansas State is who they're playing today. Arkansas State is the better offensive team, but they're a pretty bad defensive team. So this is really a collision here. And they play a bit faster. Not significantly faster, but noticeably faster, I would say, than App State does tempo-wise. So definitely a collision of styles here, where obviously when it comes to a tournament like this, I'm going to tend to want to lean to the team that slows the game down and plays the better defense, even though this is going to involve laying points with a slower-paced team. Arkansas State, I just think they're now kind of overperforming a little bit and look too good because of what they did yesterday. They just wrecked Louisiana, even though Arkansas State was actually the favorite over Louisiana in that game, even though I think they're the lower seed out of the two. Louisiana was also the team that won this conference last year. This conference was kind of a 4-horse race last year I believe it was between App State, James Madison, Marshall, and Louisiana last year. And Louisiana was the team that got out of there somehow I don't know if South Alabama was one of the teams in the mix. I forget, but Louisiana was the team that was able to get out of there. So Arkansas State beating them, I mean, that was pretty big, man. And they had lost to Louisiana both times during the regular season. So that was I don't know if it was considered to be triple revenge. Did Louisiana knock out Arkansas State in the tournament last year? They did not. But even so, Arkansas State had lost them at least 3 times in a row and were able to beat them, and not just beat them, but absolutely annihilate them, just wreck them yesterday in that game. That game was at 3 p.m. So now you got App State. I think, did App State play an earlier game yesterday too? I don't know. I feel like they did, but the reason why I like this so much is that Arkansas State looked way too good in that game. And App State, they played at 12:30. So App State played an earlier game too. So I think that's going to help as well. App State, they may have played the more difficult game, but it was earlier in the day, and it was a scare, man. They were a 12.5-point favorite against a Georgia Southern team that doesn't even have 10 wins on the season, one of the lower seeds in this conference. And I think Georgia Southern had already pulled off an upset in this tournament or something, and App State almost got caught and had to go into overtime to beat them. So I think that's going to scare App State, man, into focus here. So that's why I like App State here. Arkansas State looked way too good yesterday, blowing out the team that won this conference last year in Louisiana. Just a crazy blowout win by 20 or something more points. App State had a real scare and almost lost to Georgia Southern, although the public is probably still only going to play App State if they even see this game. If they play it, probably not a lot of public involvement in a Sun Belt tournament game, but App State obviously has the way better record, and people are obviously going to know they're the better team here. And Arkansas State is actually underrated. Their record doesn't really indicate how good they actually are either. I think they're better than their record indicates. They are one of the better teams in this conference, but even so, the spot I just think sets up a lot better for App State to be focused after almost losing as a giant favorite yesterday. They were able to escape and move on to the next round. I think that means they're going to refocus and play a much better game here, whereas Arkansas State, they've played multiple games in this tournament now. So I think this is where it turns around, and App State now has a little bit of an advantage because they've faced some adversity already in the tournament. They faced a tough game yesterday. They have a tournament game under their belt now in this tournament this season. So that kind of all gets thrown out now. Now, Arkansas State has played multiple games in the tournament. Now they're reaching a point where they might start running out of gas a little bit more than App State will be, even though App State played the tougher game yesterday. So we will see. But I'll lay the 5 with App State here in that one. And yeah, I do think they are the better team as well. And I like the better defense as well. And I like how that spot lines up. So I'll be on that one. And then the other game that I will be on is going into the regular season, Big Ten. We almost have a situation where you have a home unranked favorite against a ranked underdog, but not quite. Although KenPom has this being like a 3-point line, but I had to take 1.5, but it's only 1.5 points off. But I'm going to be on Iowa in their home closer. I think this is a good spot for Iowa, man. Illinois, they're coming off their big game of the season. They're coming off their home closer, which was against Purdue, and that was the game between the two, like very, very clearly the top 2 teams in the conference. Purdue did completely shoot out of their minds, though. 56% from 3-point range, whereas Illinois was only 25%. So I don't think that's going to happen again. So that aspect of it makes me not want to fade Illinois in a game after this, but everything else about this, you got to fade Illinois here, man. That was Illinois' biggest game of the season, basically hosting Purdue in your home, like finisher, your senior day, basically. And Illinois had the lead for the entire first half of that game. Looked like they might be able to do it. Illinois was beating Purdue. They had almost a double-digit lead at a couple points in the first half, had the lead into the second half, and then wound up not being able to do it, and Purdue was able to overtake them and win the game. Illinois, that's got to set up like a hangover spot for them, and they were so close to beating Purdue in that game. It's such a big game, and they've already beaten this Iowa team once by 10 at home, so I think they're already probably looking forward to the tournament, the Big Ten tournament at this point. Illinois, I believe they have the 2 seed clinched in the Big Ten tournament, so they have nothing really to gain or lose in this game here. They already know they're going to be right somewhere around like a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, probably. They're already the 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament. They were not able to win on their senior night. It was a pretty close game against Purdue where they just couldn't quite get there. So I think this spot is just really bad for Illinois coming off of that, coming off such a huge game. Whereas for Iowa, I like the spot a lot better, actually. Iowa, this is their senior night. They got one of the best teams in the conference coming into their house. It's a team that already beat them once. It's Illinois. Their senior night, and Iowa knows that they're a bubble team. The bracketologists all have Iowa as one of the, like, basically one of the first teams out of the tournament right now. And if they get some big wins like this one, then that might really help their tournament resume. It might be the difference between them getting in or being left out. Whereas I think not too long ago, Iowa was not considered to even be on the bubble, but now they've won 4 of the last 5 games, beating Wisconsin, Michigan State. Those are pretty big wins, and then losing to Illinois in the middle there. And then after that, they won 2 more games against Penn State at home and then on the road at Northwestern. So those types of games, I mean, the Northwestern one's a pretty good win because they're in 3rd in the conference, but I don't think it's like a monster upset win, really. Iowa actually, I think, might be the better team. Yeah, Northwestern, both teams really shot well in that game. Northwestern was actually only 2.5-point favorites, so telling you that Iowa was actually the better of those 2 teams. So I think Iowa just kind of has momentum because of those 2 wins. So I think those are like momentum types of wins there. It's going to carry momentum into this game against Illinois. Iowa's going to be the team that has way more motivation here, in my opinion. So I like Iowa. I'm going to do it plus the 1.5. If you look at what's going on in the line, it looks like a pros versus Joes scenario here, where Illinois is down from 2 to 1 with juice. Now you can probably find Iowa plus 1, plus 1.5, whatever. I think there are still 1.5s out there. Illinois, 63% of the tickets, but 52% of the cash over on the Iowa side. So you got the cash discrepancy very much on the Iowa side. They have the slight cash percentage, whereas the ticket percentage is way over on the other side on Illinois. So I like that discrepancy. There is reverse line movement going against Illinois. So the market indicators and the situation all lining up on Iowa. So the play there will be Iowa on that one. And then App State, I guess, I don't know if I mentioned that, that they have 86% of the tickets, 90% of the cash with App State. So I don't like the fact that they're public, but it looks like they do have the cash discrepancy and the line is moving in their direction a bit. So I don't know if there is some public or there is public action in App State a little bit. I don't know if there might be pros also on the same side as the public, which does happen sometimes, especially in some of these smaller games where there isn't as much public involvement in the App State one. So App State and Iowa, those two plays, and then going to the NBA, I'll be on one play in the NBA, which is going to be on the Orlando Magic. One thing I will mention that is confusing me is that the Bucks are up to a 5.5-point road favorite at the Clippers. I mean, I don't see anything on the injury report, so I don't know what's going on here. If the Clippers are resting Giannis, or I don't know what's happening, because I do think the Clippers are on a back-to-back. They played yesterday. They beat the Bulls. It's got to be that the Clippers are resting players, right? There's no other reason the Bucks would be a 5.5-point favorite unless the Clippers have like key players resting or out for injury, but I see nothing on the injury report that's new. So that's a weird line to me. And it looks like the Bucks also have the cash discrepancy on them. So that's not a game I'm going to get involved in. I will just stay the hell away from that one. And then T-Wolves Lakers is a huge game. I don't even know if I have a lean on that one though, but that is the latest game on the slate. That's going to be a pretty interesting game, I would say. That game will be a little bit wild. I don't even really have a feeling on that game, really, as far as that game is concerned. It's just a big game, interesting game. Lakers somewhere around a 1-point home favorite there. I don't like the spot that Cleveland is in. They just had that overtime win over Minnesota, staying at home now, and they have the Suns up next after this game against the Brooklyn Nets. I don't think it's a good spot for Cleveland here, but I don't know if I quite want to jump in on this one. The Brooklyn Nets, they're on a back-to-back, but they are coming up. They're playing a third straight road game in a back-to-back where they're coming off ugly losses to the Detroit Pistons and the Charlotte Hornets yesterday. So Brooklyn, I mean, they got wiped out by Charlotte yesterday. I just don't really love playing on a team that is on a back-to-back and playing a bunch of road games in a row, But I do lean against the Cleveland Cavs in that one. It looks like the cash discrepancy is on the Cavaliers. I don't get that, but they're down from 8.5 to 7. So the line movement is against the Cavs, in agreement with me on the Nets, but 73% of the tickets on the Cavs, 53% of the cash, on the Cavs, and 77% of the tickets on the other side on the Nets. I don't get why that would be the case, why the Nets would be public there. I don't think that they are. There's no way that they are, really. But I do lean against the Cavs in that one because they're coming off such a big win, crazy overtime win over Minnesota, and with Phoenix up next. It is kind of a sandwich spot. But the Nets on the back-to-back. But the Nets coming off a couple embarrassing losses. So the spot is setting up for – it's almost a spot where I want to play the Nets. It was close to a play for me there. The game that I'm actually on is the Orlando Magic, even though they're down from 3-2 as a home favorite. I think it's just more value on the Orlando Magic. The Magic have been one of the better home teams this year, too. A pretty good record, both straight up and against the spread at home. They are returning home from a road trip, so I don't like that aspect of it, but it is a short road trip. They do only have one day off, whereas it's going to be a play against the Pacers, who have multiple days off. And Orlando just lost a nice win streak that they had on that road trip, so I don't love that. And they are playing a fourth game in 6 days, all in different cities. So I don't love any of that, really. So the rest spot and the return home, but their last game was just a totally embarrassing loss, man, against the New York Knicks, losing 98-74. In this modern day, how do you score 74? Even if it is against a good defensive Knicks team, how do you score 74 in any game here against anyone, really? That's embarrassing. So I kind of expect Orlando to actually be refocused here. You have one of the better teams in the conference coming into your house here in Indiana. Orlando doesn't have any big games coming up next. So even though it's a return home spot, they just lost so badly, and it's a pretty good team coming into their house. So I do think that Orlando will be focused here, even though Indiana actually is 0-2 against Orlando this year. Both games in Indiana, I think Orlando's beat them twice in Indiana. So I don't know if there's going to be any sort of revenge aspect to this. But then looking at Indiana, yeah, I mean, they're only playing a third game in the last 6 days, so not 4. So they're the better rest team a little bit, and they have 2 days rest coming into this. But look at their schedule, man. They just returned home in their previous game for 1 game, and they have to go back out on the road again. So this schedule, they're kind of just all over the place. They had a 3-game road trip, finishing the road trip with a win at Dallas, a crazy win there, a good win. And then they came back home and played a tough game against Minnesota. I believe they had chances to win that game. That was a tough game. They made a huge comeback after they were getting blown out in the first half of that game and made a real game of it throughout the second half. Really tough game. Now, even though they have an extra day off, they're coming off that really tough game against Minnesota. Even though it is Orlando here, who has beat them both times they played them this year, it's still, I think, an Orlando team that's going to be more focused than they will. And Indiana has Oklahoma City up next, which, even though this is surrounded by out-of-conference games, I still think this is a sandwich spot here, surrounded by a couple of better teams in the NBA. I don't like the spot for Indiana here, and I think it is actually a spot where I expect the Magic to show focus, even though they are returning home from a road trip. At least it's only a 3-game road trip that kept them on the East Coast, so not as much of a road trip there, really. Indiana has 77% of the tickets and only 51% of the cash, so they are the public team. I think the public likes the high-flying offense of the Pacers more than they like the Magic, even though the teams have similar records. I think the Pacers have the slightly better record and the way more flashy offense. So I think if the public sees this game, they're going to think, oh, the Pacers, that high-scoring offense getting points, they'll take that. They'll take the points of the Pacers, thinking there's value there, and not want anything to do with a Magic team that just scored 74 in their most recent game. I don't think anybody's going to want anything to do with the Magic. But that is what I will do. And obviously, even though the public is on the Pacers, it looks like the cash is a lot more evenly split. So the book's kind of doing their job on that line there. Orlando Magic, -2 will be the play there. So those 3 plays for today, that will do it for me, man. Let's have happy Sunday, a good Sunday, and let's have a winning Sunday, and let's get some of these wins here. Let's enjoy these conference tournament games, and the field in the big dance is going to start shaping up as we see some of these auto bids get clinched here. So the plays once again are in the NBA, Orlando Magic -2. All these games are in the evening, all playing at the same time. So we'll see what happens. And in college basketball, Appalachian State -5 in the Sun Belt tournament, and in the Big Ten regular season finale, Iowa +1.5. Let's do it. Peace.